when you see a quarterback that you believe can be a future franchise player, you have to do it. And I would that's the vision for that, and that's how you have to operate. I think it's competitive. I mean, you look at the teams in the division. You just said it with Bryce Young, with ours. I mean, you look at every team. It's not a when you play those games, those in division games. Those are hard games. Those teams know you well, and those are tough competitive games. So I think we have a very competitive division. Well, look, Kirk handled that really well at the end of the season, and obviously Kirk's he's a really talented player. He's a great man. All those things. So, and again, he handled that role well at the end of the season. That's the plan at this point.
Terry, we asked you about the 14 players from the University of Georgia who are at the combine and two from Georgia Tech. In the past, you talked about putting up features on the board. Got another 25 players from high schools in Georgia. Just what is that like for having a fertile local ground for your local game and kids to scout and maybe help out your team?
Yeah, a lot of good players. We actually met with some of those Georgia players last night, and a lot of really good players. Like you said, not just the University of Georgia, who's obviously one of the best teams in the country, have done an unbelievable job, and then also just being from Georgia. I love youth sports and high school sports and all that, and getting to get out and see those young men. I believe it's the best in the country. Our high school and youth sports in Georgia. So excited about that, and excited about getting to spend time with those players. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We always know that those players that are our hometown guys. Yes, sir. Look, Kirk was on the injury report leading into the Denver game, and he wasn't on the injury report. Outside of that, we're only aware of that particular week. We talked about it when that change was made. It was a football decision. It was based off football decision. There wasn't anything injury related. I'm sorry. Can you? I can't quite. That's a good question. And I think you always have to be always adapting to the landscape of the league. You're always adapting, and yet there are always core values that you have. And up front, you have to be good up front. When you walk in there and you got a big physical offensive line and you have a big physical defensive line, it's going to always it's going to make a difference. So I don't think that's changed. But then as you go through the process of other positions and what's critical, I think you always have to make sure you're adapting those areas. But up front, you got to be big and physical. Yeah, I don't know. I would say maybe some of the things that are going on in the college game as you see it, and you see those things making their way to the pro game, and how you have to adapt in those ways. But again, we're always going to be adaptive, but you better be good up front. Well, we're here to gather information, and that's what we're doing. We're spending a lot of times. We talked earlier about all these interviews, these formal interviews with the players. We're to gather information in that way. Usually, you can spend time and see people face to face and talk about your roster and those things. And so you want to have that, but it's really about we're still in the gathering information phase. So I would say it's a successful week if we go in with a plan to gather as much information as we can, and that's what makes it successful. You said the 40, the medical. So the medical is critical, right? So I'd put getting all that medical information is really number one. In that, the 40 nowadays you can have a guy that blazes the 40 but doesn't play fast, and then vice versa. So we focus more on play speed. We also get different numbers nowadays with the GPS and all those things. We can really measure those things in different ways outside of just running a 40-yard dash. So we look at those numbers because you do have the apples to apples. What's up, man? So we look at all those numbers, but I would say the medical's critical. Not just the workouts. We're going to look at the other numbers, and the interviews are critical. You're spending time with those guys, and you think about when you think back to different interviews. Sometimes you get that blink reaction. Just spending 18 minutes with a guy, you really get a good feel for him, and vice versa. So it's all a part of the process, but the medical is critical.
When it comes down to it, you mentioned the GPS being the medical. Can they play ball with it like the gut? That's the determining factor when you use the trigger for you guys to like.
Well, like I said, we have the board set right now from our February meetings, and that's just with the college scouts, boots on the ground. They spent all that time on the road, gathering all the information that they can. They know these players really well. They've been scouting for a long time, and you set the board based off football. Now you have to say discipline as we continue to gather the information. We assess the intelligence. We meet with the players and really get the background and the makeup. We get the medical. All those things are going to factor in, but it still comes down to football. And that's where we always have to focus on. Man, we have a lot of respect for that position. And, man, with Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, our running back room, I wouldn't trade it with anybody. And so we think it's critical. And it depends on who the player is. And probably the reason it hasn't been is because when you look at drafts, there's certain positions that usually only the hit rate is really high in certain rounds and it's really low in other rounds. Running backs, historically, you can hit at any point. There's an undrafted free agent running back or a running back that shows up at a rookie camp that ends up being a good player every year. So that's probably why some people would say it's been devalued. But then there's certain players like the teams you're talking about, like a Bijan Robinson, that are just completely different animals. And they're just take the position off of it. Bijan's a special player. Yeah. Yeah, good question. And there's always rules and measurables and things that you places you don't want to reach. But at the corner position, what are the critical factors? Your cover talent. Can you play coverage? Can you tackle? And can you take the ball away? And so if you have a player that is a shorter player at whatever, but do you believe in him as a tackler? Do you believe he can cover? And can he play bigger? So even though despite his size, because you also have some bigger corners that don't play big if they're not tackling anybody and they can't go up and make a play on the ball. Doesn't matter. So we more assess. We're going to look at the measurables, and you want to have an awareness of it. So we know that this guy doesn't fit the prototype of this position, but then it goes back to football. Can he cover? Can he tackle? And can he make a play on the ball? So that competitiveness, that makeup is critical. No doubt, and not just a return game, but something like in this days of whether you're a gunner, whether you're a vice, like you always, that's another phase of the game that's a critical phase. And so every player that we bring in outside of your interior lineman or your O line and D line, you have to be able to do something in the kicking game. You want to go? You know what's really interesting about that? Now, when you look at players, you're used to looking at a player's profile and you see he's been at this school 4 years, or it was more unique to see a player that's transferred. But now you can look at a player. We were talking to a player last night that's been to 3 different schools, and he's 25 years old, married with 2 kids. So it's just a different level where you're used to seeing these 20-year-olds that only played 3 years at one school. What I would say the scouts do a really good job of, because the challenge that you have now is you have different when a scout goes into a school and they're gathering information about a player that team has had them for 3 years, they recruited them, they've had them all those years. Now that's not the same, and so you're kind of piecing it together and getting information from people who didn't have them for as long, so that it makes it a little more challenging for the scouts. But ultimately, we still have to figure out a way to nail those makeups, figure out that part of it. You still want to know why. Why did a player leave and go to different schools? And so you want to answer those questions. Again, it's the same thing in high school. Honestly, now, like again, we talked to a player that's been in multiple high schools and moved around, and so it's just a unique landscape that we're still figuring out. But we still have to make sure we focus on the makeup, and I would say our scouts do a really good job of that. Thanks. Yeah, whether it's Kirk Cousins or any other player, we have to really look at how is this going to help our team and how is this going to affect the Atlanta Falcons. And so not just with Kirk, with anybody, and all those decisions we make, that's what we have to look at. What's right for this football team.
What internally is
Yeah, look, Kyle's a really talented player. He's done some really good things, and you can see, man, you can make a highlight tape and see all the good things that he's done. And we talked about that at the end of the season. We know there's a really high expectation for him, and so where we stand at this point, where Kyle, in his mind, this offseason, I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure I'm effective and I'm helping this team win, and the same with all of us in the building, with myself and everyone in the building. Just like any other player, we're pouring into our players and making sure we're doing everything we can do. Again, I said after the season that when you take a player that high, we know there's a expectation, probably an unreal expectation for all those players, but we believe that Kyle's going to put everything he can do into it to be the best player he can for us, and we're going to do the same for him. I don't know where those things come from, but we keep those things private. With any player, we're always, whether we're talking to the representation, so much respect for Mike McCartney, Kirk Cousins, all that. But we're going to keep those things private. Like we're not going to talk about with any communication with them or with anybody else on our team. We just have to do what's right for the Atlanta Falcons, And so I said after the season, that's where we stood at that point, and we just always have to do what's right for the Atlanta Falcons. It is unique. No, it is unique with that. So with that, there just has to be a high level of communication, and anything that happens, obviously everybody has to be on the same page with it. So we just have to handle that. But so much respect for obviously Kirk, Mike McCartney, but we'll just keep all those things private.
All right, thanks, guys.
Good. Thank you.
Let's see what we got here. I'm short, so we got to lower the mic here. Yeah, I'm good. All right, what we got? It's a lot. I'm a lot more comfortable in it. It's like a whirlwind. Thinking back through the first year, people actually like, oh, do you have? Was it like, drinking through a fire hose? And oh no, it's great, But then when you actually think back of it, it's drinking through a fire hose. It is. I mean, everything's coming at you fast. They're coming at you from all ends and in all directions. So this year we're in the routine. The organization, our player personnel department knows the routine. The coaches have been through it once already. So everyone's familiar with the process. And so, it's a lot. We're in the groove now. Yeah, that was, Elijah was a big one for us. Obviously we loved what he did once we got him over to LA, and the flexibility and the versatility he offers and what it allows our defense to do. We played a lot of three safeties last year, and so that allows us to stay with what we found successful last year and lets Derwin be Derwin, and so that was a huge, re-signing extension for us. So we're very happy that got done.
You hear a lot about this running back class being like a super deep running back class.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? And what do you look for as far as traits that fit into your
Yeah, it is a deep running back class in my opinion, and I think that's a lot of people's opinions. In terms of traits, competitiveness with the Chargers, that's the number one trait. What type of competitor he is, what type of teammate they are off the field, and character. But when you look at a guy that can run the ball, obviously you love versatility. There's some backs that are guys that are just going to tote the rock. There's other guys that offer a little bit more in the passing game. So all backs are different, so you want them to be able to pass protect. Some are better at that than others. And but as a group, it is a pretty talented group.
Jim mentioned at the end of the season trying to bring everybody back or darn near
Yeah.
everybody back.
Yeah.
Obviously, Elijah's a step towards
Yeah,
that.
there's one. All right.
Close with any of the other, internal free agents.
To define close, not close, I'm not sure if I'd put a close on any of them, but conversations are being had with all of them. And I'm with Coach. I loved our group of guys last year. It was a special team. It was great to be a part of, and you felt it out there, and you guys saw them out there. Those of you that were in LA with us, and it really was a lot of fun. And yeah, ideally we'd love to bring them all back. Is that realistic? I don't know if it is. Coach doesn't know if it is, but we're going to try. With
compensatory pay.
Okay, yeah. I love comp picks. Yeah, great question. I think you balance. You do. If you lose somebody, you say, okay, what's that going to get us back? And you can make a decision based off of that. There's other ways to add players. If it's a cap casualty or not a UFA, so you can play that game. But I think the main goal is always to build the best team we can possibly build. Yes, you want to acquire comp picks, but you really do that when you just have a really deep team that continually replenishes itself, and we're still building towards that. So is every year going to deliver 3 or 4 comp picks? I can't guarantee that, and I would never guarantee that. But I don't think you let it play too much of an impact in your decision making.
How much of that philosophy is influenced by the Ravens?
By the Ravens? A lot. I mean, I lived there for 26 years. I watched Ozzie do it and master it, and I saw the benefits of it. So I believe it's free picks, and it's a way to build depth on your roster, and you end up hitting. You get starters, you get great backups. So it definitely is something that I found to be very valuable for us, the way we did in Baltimore, and hopefully it's going to be valuable for us going forward in LA. Familiarity, he's a great dude. I've only known him for a week, or maybe a little over it, but he's been awesome, and he's grinder. And it gives you an outside perspective, a fresh outside perspective. The other thing he's going to bring is, he's going to be familiar with this year's draft class, so we can mine him. Obviously we know the Michigan players, but he's played against a lot of players in college. He's coached against a lot of players in college, so we can mine him for what his opinion is on those players.
What was Jim's kind of evaluation of him before bringing him on? Did he say anything to you?
Oh, just that he'd be a great ad for us, and thought what he thought of him, how he hired him, when he hired him, and the job he did there at Michigan. So we were excited to get him.
Joe, from the AFC West perspective, a lot of turnover over the last couple of years at head coach, general managers, and stuff. What makes that division so unique to try to build and compete in?
Oh man, it's just a great division. I mean, and you look at, obviously you got the Chiefs, right? And that's who we're all chasing. They've been the kings of the division for, a long time now. And, but there's a lot of talent in the division. There's a lot of great coaching, Vegas just added Pete, and so a tremendous amount of respect for all the coaches in our division and the teams themselves. And, a lot of I know a lot of the GMs, and they do things the right way. So it's great. We get to compete against each other and try to get to the top.
Specific to the Chiefs, I mean, obviously you had a front row seat in Baltimore as well from some of the clashes in the postseason. What makes an Andy Reid coach team sort of unique the way it is today, that they're able to make that kind of a run?
Yeah, I think Andy does a great job. I mean, I've been a fan of his since he was the head coach of Philly. Grew up in Philly, and so he just does a great job team building, and his coaching staff is excellent, and they do a great job of finding pieces that fit and then tailoring their schemes around the players that they do have.
How are you feeling about opening the season in Brazil?
I'm excited. I've never been to Brazil. I've only, in terms of outside the country, British Virgin Islands and Turks and Caicos and 2 London trips. So I'm excited. My family's excited. It's great. We're in a standalone game, kick off the season Friday night. So it's awesome that we're selected for it, and looking forward to it.
Are you worried at all about the state of the field?
No, I'm not. And honestly, those are things that really don't fall on my radar. But I know last year there was some questions on it, but I know they've improved the surface.
Logistics, have you kind of thought about when you guys would travel for that and like all the planning that goes into such a long trip?
Yeah, we've started talking about that. When we had hints that we may be going to Brazil, we started talking about that. Still in the process of exploring the best options, when to leave. It's I think a 14-hour flight, I believe. And I think it's four time zones. So, it'll be a little challenge navigating it, but I think we'll have a good plan for it.
How important is this week in terms of like getting stuff done with free agents you want to resign and meeting with agents on top of the players? How important is that other aspect?
Yeah, it's a big week that way because you get a lot of face to face with the agents of our players. So all those 26 UFAs, we get a chance to meet with a lot of their agents while we're here. And even if we've had discussions, we can just sit down and continue the discussions. So yeah, you get some work done. You get a feel for where they're at. If we don't already have that feel, but it's continued dialogue. From the UFA standpoint. I didn't hear a whole lot of the question. I know you said offensive line.
So with 3 first-round picks on the offensive line, do you feel like that's the scope, or is that position solidified, or is replenishing the skill position something that the team sees as a focus?
So I never think a position is solidified other than quarterback, and even with quarterback, you better have, depth behind him. Right. So no, I would never say any position on our team is solidified, because it's every year is different. And so, that won't preclude us from taking an offensive lineman, because there's 3 first-round picks on the offensive line, but we're going to take the best player available when it comes to drafting.
In your position, a lot of guys with helmets on the wall, multi-year starters, lots of years of production. Was that purposeful on your part, just to kind of set the tone that way?
Purposeful. It's the way it's stacked, and when you get a guy, when 2 players are level, even, same grade, you start weighing what they have. So, okay, he's a 4-year starter. He's a 3-year starter. Great leader, team captain. Those little things give him a bump. So I think it's not intentional, but it's thought through and discussed, and then it just played itself out that way.
Joe, over the last 2 or 3 years, you've been doing different things. Over the last 2 of you have had different titles. Are there things schematically or conceptually you've seen in the NFL that make you think about personnel differently, maybe prioritizing a position over another that you might not have in the past?
I think, if I think I heard your question is, as it's changed, the game's changed. Do you prioritize other different positions differently? You do and you don't. I think certainly there's evaluation to every position, and some positions make more than others, so they may carry a little bit more value. But that you don't push a player up the board because the value has more. There's more value for that position. So you still want to take the best players available, and but you do pay attention a little bit to value.
Teams you've been with, those, or anything that's kind of bumped you in the last few years, like, oh, maybe we should look at this because we're seeing more of this now?
Nothing I can think of.
When considering taking a tight end high in the draft, how important is it for them to be impactful in the run game as well as being a dynamic passer?
Yeah, you want a complete tight end if you take a tight end high in the draft, right? You want the weapon, but you want someone you can get out there. Otherwise, they're one-dimensional. So you take a player high, you want someone who can help in all facets of the game.
To come here and not need a quarterback?
It's awesome. And I've been afforded that opportunity many years over my career, but there's been some years where we didn't have one, and it's a little stressful, and
with some of the GMs that are running around here looking for the next answer.
Yeah, it's been a while because we went from Joe to Lamar in Baltimore, and then I come to Justin, so it's like, but I do remember the days where it's like, okay, we need to address the quarterback situation. And it'd be a stressful thing. And you got to have a quarterback in this league to be consistently successful.
Back from Atlanta, speak about Ladd McConkey and the culture Kirby has created in Athens that translates to success in the NFL.
Oh yeah. So, Ladd, love him. Just a special competitor, great dude, great teammate. And, certainly what he did this year was awesome to see. And then with Kirby, I've known Kirby probably, I don't know, 27 years, 29 years, really since I got into coaching and working at Auburn. And, watched him grow as a coach. And Georgia's just a special place, what he's established there. I mean, just a special place, great place. I mean, I went to Auburn, but Athens is probably my second favorite SEC town and environment. So he's got a good thing going there.
Joe, the number of small school players invited to the combine has been declining since the transfer rules changed. There's only 7 FCS players here this week. Does that matter to you as a general manager? Is that something you picked up on, and what does that mean overall?
We're out there looking, and we're in all those small schools, and I think it might be a cyclical thing, and FCS schools, yeah, now with the transfer portal, they're going to get more opportunities, and that's a great opportunity for them. And now, obviously, it hurts some of the schools they're transferring out of, but yeah, I think that will be a common theme going forward because schools can go out there and acquire players that want to move up and go to a higher level of competition.
Joe, you're playing the same division as the Chiefs. What did you take away from how the Eagles beat them and their team building strategy that you can apply to the Chargers?
Listen, the Chiefs are a great team, and the Eagles beat them on that day. And I've been a part of some great teams that didn't always win the game. And so Chiefs do a great job, and they're a well-rounded team. And I thought the Eagles had a better team that day.
I'm wondering, in Justin's career, do you evaluate players in how they might make him better, how they may make Justin's game grow, or do you evaluate players with how Justin's game might elevate them in the NFL? I mean, how does that balance work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's probably different cases when you're like, hey, this guy could help Justin. Hey, Justin will really help unlock this player. I mean, you look at Ladd's a good example. Ladd caught more balls last year than he's ever caught in his career at Georgia. He got more opportunities, but I think Justin's the type of quarterback, to answer your question ultimately, that makes other players better. And so that's what we believe we have in him, and that's how we select players. We select every player, regardless of the position, with the idea that Justin will help this guy level up.
I wonder if it's familiarity at Michigan. How does that affect how you evaluate Michigan guys compared to other prospects?
We evaluate them the same way. We go into the schools, our scouts go into the schools, we talk to the staff that's currently there, get the background, we build a profile on them, coaches evaluate them. And yes, there's some coaches on our staff that are evaluating guys they've coached, but they're also going to slot them in where they believe they belong. And so there's an influence of knowledge about the player that they may have more of that player than another player that they don't know. But we rank the players based on the player they are, the athlete they are, the talent they show on film.
Joe, you guys are going to be able to spend this free agency.
One more time.
You guys are going to be able to spend this free agency with a lot of cap space. How do you determine to address team needs via the draft or via free agency?
Yeah, philosophically, I believe in building through the draft. Now obviously you have to spend money in free agency. You spend money on your own players. We have 26 players that are still unrestricted free agents, so we have an opportunity to re-sign as many as them first, and then attack free agency as it happens. And you use free agency to fill out your roster, to supplement your roster, to go get something you need. But the two play hand in hand. But I think you don't make decisions in free agency and then plan to make adjust accordingly in the draft. You want to be able to draft the best player available and help the team, because the draft is a 4 or 5 year solution when you pick a player. So free agency is not always that. Last year we signed a bunch of 1-year deals, and so some deals aren't as long. So stay draft centric and use free agency to build around it.
Joe, you redid Joey Bosa.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
I can learn and observe, but we've had a desire to build in the trenches and on both sides of the ball, and that's going to continue.
Nose, or would you want him to diversify out the 3-tech, 5-tech?
Yeah, I think KB has the flexibility to play anywhere on the defensive line. So,
Omar, one of the bigger criticisms from fans has been the lack of modernization, I guess, in the offense. What would you say to fans who have that kind of mindset right now?
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I'll just say, we weren't good enough, and we have to adjust, and we have to get better. We weren't good enough last year.
When you look at this draft class in comparison to other draft classes, where would you say are the 2 to 3 strengths of this draft class compared to other ones that you've analyzed in recent years?
Yeah, it's early, but I'll say it's a good draft. There's a lot of talented players here and guys that can help us. I'm looking at, there's a lot of time between now and April, but I'll say obviously you look at the defensive line group and the DB group and the running back group. The edge guys and the O-line. There's some good players at all those groups.
Michael always talks about finding football lovers, guys that love the game. How do you approach this process to be able to determine if that guy is a football liker or a lover?
Yeah, the biggest piece, I'll say one of the biggest pieces of this process for us is the time that we spend with the guys, interviewing them and talking to them. And that's where really we try to determine that. We don't have a lot of time, but we try to maximize every second we have these guys, talking to them, asking them certain questions, seeing how they think, how they process, and seeing if like you said, if they're guys that love football and winning is important to them.
We didn't see Roman Wilson at all this year due to injuries and whatnot. Similar to how when Calvin was injured throughout his first year, we didn't see him. Do you feel confident that Roman can take a similar path to Calvin Austin and still have, a breakout year following an injury-riddled season?
Yeah, I have a lot of confidence in Roman. Unfortunately, our season didn't continue, but Roman was in position to play if we needed him to in the postseason. I think it could have helped us, but the arrow up on him.
Omar, you guys were late to Brandon Ayuk until pretty late in the process last year. When that fell through kind of right before the season and maybe left you with less options than in free agency or trade or otherwise, was there any learnings from that situation, just how you approached the receiver position?
Yeah, what was the first part of the question?
You guys were linked to Brandon Ayuk throughout the offseason last year, and just by the time he had signed back with the San Francisco 49ers, maybe less options on the table for wide receiver. Was there any learning?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that the first part of that question, but I'll just say, every one of these things is a learning experience, and we're always looking to try to get better, whether it's through the draft or making a trade or the waiver wire. And if there are opportunities out there that we can pursue that are going to make us better and help us win our championship, we're going to do it.
Omar, how do Michael Parsons and Myles Garrett's role in the market influence your conversations with TJ? And what do you have to keep in mind when you're looking at that edge rusher market?
I think every one of those situations is a little different. I'm not going to comment on another team's players, but obviously we want TJ here for a long time, and we'd like to do our part in trying to get something done at the right time. And I think he feels the same way, and we'll see where it goes.
Are you more so looking for the answer in 2025, or are you hopeful that you can find your future franchise quarterback this offseason?
You'd like to find the guy that's going to help us, but I know Mike, we've talked, like, we don't have a guy under contract right now, so all options are on the table. Anybody else?
Anyone? All right.
Yeah, Ryan. Was really excited about Ryan's progression last year. He just got better and better every week, and it was just unfortunate. He had a significant injury, and we'll see how all that shakes out. But was really disappointed how that ended for him because, man, that young man was really trending in the right direction. Good. Thanks, guys.
Hi, Mike. Hi. Hi, Karen. Morning. Is that Joe's?
Yep.
Okay, Karen, what do you got? No statements.
I got you.
What do you got?
We haven't spoken to you since you hired your coaching staff. I'm curious about the genesis of Josh McDaniels coming aboard. Had you been in talks with him prior to even interviewing, and basically how did that all shake out?
Yeah, well, again, just looking at the staff, extremely proud of the staff that we were able to put together. It's difficult in the National Football League to be able to get, every coach that you may covet or may want to get outside the coordinators that, aren't a coordinator at somewhere else just because of the rules. Like teams are under contract. Some teams want to keep the coaches that they have. They feel like they're good coaches, but we were able to put together a great staff, one that we're really proud of. And you asked about Josh, and I would say that, having had communications with Josh in my role in Cleveland, he wasn't under contract with the team. So we had numerous conversations, interviewed a handful of great candidates, and in the end felt like Josh was the best fit to lead our offense, just like Terrell was the best fit to lead our defense, and Jeremy and Tom returning to lead the special teams unit.
Right, is Terrell going to call the defense?
Yeah, that's the plan. Like he's going to be the defensive coordinator. He's going to call defenses, and he's an aggressive-minded coach that's coached really aggressive defensive linemen. That's what that's his background. And so I've enjoyed the process of what he's learned when he's gone to Detroit, what he learned with us in Tennessee, to be able to tie the back end together with the stuff that we want to do with the front, and those conversations that have been going on in the last couple of weeks since everybody's been together.
Mike, was there ever a point in Cleveland where there was a conversation about whether a permanent job was in the future for you? And did you tell them, no, my plan is to leave?
No, I didn't want to permanently consult in Cleveland for the rest of my career. Different position? No. Enjoyed my time. I appreciate Jimmy and Dee, Tyler Haslam family, Andrew and Kevin, and the relationships that I got to make there. It's been fun to see those individuals. I walked into the suite last night in between interviews, and they said, "Oh, get out of here." I said, "I don't work for you guys anymore. You can't tell me what to do." So it was fun just to see them, but there was no conversation about any long-term plans there. I would have, listened because I didn't have a job at the time.
What did you maybe learn from that experience in Cleveland that helped contribute to you as a coach?
Just how critical, just the little things, right? Just the staff and being mindful of when new coaches come onto the staff. And I know that Kevin was conscious of that. I think that's why I love the idea of having me work with the offense. It's something that I've thought was very beneficial to those coaches, to me, to have conversations, the way that some offensive coaches see things and the way that defensive coaches may see them a little differently. And so have been able to do that in New England and moved Ben over to defense to help Terrell and that staff just look at it from an offensive perspective and things that, we can make sure that we're taken care of and not letting slip.
Mike, how would you describe how the team will approach free agency?
Hopefully aggressive. We want to be aggressive. We want to target players that we feel like are going to help us. They're going to be outstanding players. They're going to be outstanding additions to the locker room and the community. And if that all fits and the compensation fits, but I'm confident that we'll be aggressive. We've started some of those discussions internally. And I think having different plans and having an option A and option B, things are going to change. Everybody's looking at the same players. So we have to be ready to pivot and adjust and have a vision for each player, I would say, at each level. There's going to be this high level that things are going to get done very quickly. That'll transition then to, maybe just some mid-range dollars. And then obviously you look at opportunity. So free agency gets broken down into, compensation, and then it gets broken down into opportunity. And I feel like we're in a position to offer both as far as compensation and opportunity for some of these players.
What's one of the bigger things the team has to do to support Drake Maye?
Well, there's a lot. Again, I think you always talk about being able to protect them. You have to be able to, have some guys that can help them on the edges and be able to make contested catches. And you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to have, perfect ball placement, right? And those are all things that we talk about, trying to support Drake, believing that he is the future of our franchise at quarterback, and been able to meet with him and talk with him and just get to know him as a person. But you have to look at the lines of scrimmage, and you look no further than the Super Bowl game where, that game was clearly won at the line of scrimmage. I think it's a good draft. I think there's a lot of names. There's a lot of personalities. Some guys we met last night that were serious. Some guys had a different personality, was maybe a little bit more engaging. And I think that's fun. I think all we're trying to do through this process is get the players to be as authentic as possible, to figure out where the fit is, and how they can add to our roster and our team and the vision that we have for them. And I would say that last night was a great start, going through that process with the players that came in there, and it just happened to be the D line and a lot of the edge players and the inside linebackers.
Are there trends you've seen in the NFL that have kind of changed the way you think about coaching, the way you think about personnel? Maybe you think about different positions differently than you might have even 3 years ago?
Well, I'm always going to believe that coaching is about connections and making relationships with players and holding them accountable and being honest and giving them things that are going to help them and being creative. I'll never stray from that. I'm going to continue to always try to find ways to teach them whatever their capacity is, whatever we have to do to get them the knowledge that they need. We're going to try to develop players. We've done that in our past, in our history, focusing on what they can do as opposed to what they can't, having an energy every day to come in the building. It's a long season, and I have to be able to provide that and let that trickle down through our coaches and our players. Trends, I think, look how critical the nickel position has become and how dynamic that player can be. You need guys that can cover, obviously, but the edges of the defense, be able to rush and affect the quarterback. I don't know if any of that will change. There'll be scheme things that change, and some teams believe in RPO, some believe in, trying to block the extra defender. Some teams believe in reading the end and letting the quarterback, those are things that we're always going to adapt and adjust to and add when we feel like is important. But the fundamentals and the technique, our effort in which we play with, I think those will withstand the test of time, regardless of what scheme you want to run.
Mike, now that you've really gotten to know your roster since you've been hired, do you view this as a long-term rebuild, or you just mentioned you're looking to be aggressive in free agency? Are you looking for a rapid rate of improvement here?
Well, we have to improve. I think that's the goal. Our expectations aren't going to change. It's going to be to win the division. It's going to be to host home playoff games, and it's going to be to compete for championships. So we're never going to put a timetable or any sort of prediction on when that may happen, but it has to happen. And it's going to start April 7th when our guys come in, and we're going to build a program. We're going to have a foundation. We're going to give them something to believe in and to be proud of, and hopefully they're able to hold each other accountable and to that standard. And if not, then my job's to protect the football team.
Have you gotten the sense at all? Sorry, just to follow up really quickly. Have you gotten the sense at all locally that fans don't necessarily have the appetite for a longer process when it comes to getting back to the?
Well, I don't think anybody has a longer appetite. We all want to win. That's why we're here. That's why I got hired. And it's to win. It's to put a product on the field that they can be excited about, that they can care about, and they can support. That's the whole goal. And they shouldn't have to wait very long. And, but we also have to understand that, we're not going to fix every issue on the first day of free agency, or we're not going to fill every hole on the first or second day of the draft. I'm sorry, you had a question right here.
Thank you. To that point,
Just yell like some of these other people.
just given
Don't be so nice.
Given the amount of salary cap space you guys do have, would you feel comfortable paying a free agent perhaps above their market value in order to ensure that you fill a need?
Well, I'm sure I like to shop like everybody else. And so when you go and there's only one of, a certain car, maybe you have to pay a little bit more for that one car because there's only one of them. When you start to get into a range where you feel like there's a area where players are comparable and you like 3 or 4 players at a certain area for a certain role, you may not have to overspend. But it's free agency. I think that everybody overspends sometimes in free agency.
How much input does Josh McDaniels get on which players are signed or drafted into the offense?
I would say it'd be the same as our entire coaching staff. I want them to be included in those conversations. The one thing I've learned as a head coach is that there's always going to be players that coaches are going to covet, and there's going to be players that scouts are going to covet for certain reasons, and they call them traits and all this other stuff. And coaches want players that they can trust. And when we come across those players, I always chuckle because as being a position coach, I'm like, oh yeah, this guy's going to love this guy. And then the scouts are going to love this guy, and then they're going to sit there and argue. So I see that come up, and I can appreciate that. But our coaches are going to have input They're going to evaluate them. They've evaluated the free agents. They've turned the reports in for us to look at and review. And then we'll give them a draft list, and then they'll, provide information on those players as well.
Mike, obviously, assembling your coaching staff. You've assembled coaching staffs a number of times. How has your thinking evolved in the number of assistants you have in specialized roles, like having a passing game coordinator? Has that changed over the years?
Well, I think a lot of times we just want everybody to have a clearly defined role, do the best job in the job that they're in, and then as they, excel in that role, that we look for ways to give them more to do. And we never want to hold anybody back. We want to provide opportunity. And if we can't provide that same opportunity with the Patriots, then we would allow them to go and pursue other opportunities. But the whole idea is that you teach people a system, and they understand who you are. You have a loyalty and a trust to it, and that you're able to promote from within. So I think that there's been some specialized things. I also think that those are ways to reward individuals, and maybe just to provide another title. But their input is always going to be valued and is going to be the same.
To have bigger coaching staffs maybe than it was 5-10 years ago?
Well, our practice squad has increased, right? So to make sure that we're as efficient as possible, I think that if you can identify some young quality control coaches that are, we have to have energy. It's a long season. I don't want anybody in there till midnight, coming back in at 4 a.m. I just don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy for the individual. I don't think that's healthy for their families. And, I think that the people that benefit the least are the players. Like we have to come into this meeting each and every day, sell our vision, sell our plan on how to win each and every week. And if we don't have enough people to remain efficient, then sometimes people get worn down, and I don't want to see that happen. Now, we don't want people just standing around doing nothing. We want to make sure that everybody has a job and a role on our staff.
Mike, given your relationship with Tom Brady, how do you feel he's going to do as an owner with the Las Vegas Raiders?
How hard is it? It can't be that hard, right? It's not like playing, but no, Tom will provide great input. It's important that he's involved in our league. I think that that's a great thing for the National Football League.
You mentioned the division being the first goal. The Bills have really had a chokehold on it the past few years. I know you know Sean. What do you have to do to get over the hump that is, what they've built there in Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to continue to win your home football games. You have to make, playing at Gillette a tough place to play, and then you have to go on the road and be able to win games in the fourth quarter when you go on the road, whether that's in the heat in Miami or, cold, wind, rain, whatever it may be in Buffalo. So, and obviously the history and the tradition with the Jets and that rivalry. So, it's exciting. But it also isn't just about the Buffalo Bills. I mean, there's a lot of other elements to it. They've been extremely successful, how talented, and I've always appreciated Sean's teams, the way they play with the effort, the toughness, the fundamentals, and then obviously what Josh has given them, from a quarterback standpoint.
Mike, what's the day-to-day difference in moves between an organization that has a quarterback and one that needs one?
A mood, yeah, it's up to each individual. I mean, we can't rely on having a certain player to dictate what our mood is going to be. We have to, we dictate the mood that we have and the demeanor and the outlook that we have based on whoever we have. But if you're asking me what my mood is, I'm excited, energetic, positive, looking to build and get to work. Thank you.
Go ahead, Paul. You want to kick us off?
Sure. In terms of the accuracy and the decision making you're looking for in quarterback, how rare a quality is that overall and out of this draft class?
Yeah, it's one of those qualities, those three decision making, timing, accuracy, in scouting quarterbacks is not an exact science. You can see over the years that there's been really quality players that you think had it that maybe didn't show up when it actually came time, and then there's ones that you weren't sure if they did and they show up and they play well. So, yeah, those are things that we have to do our due diligence on and make sure that we're trying to unturn all the stones from the tape, from the person, from the workouts. All that stuff is a part of the process to try to make the best decision we can when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks in general.
As you go through that process, like an arm strength, like pure arm strength versus sort of pinpoint accuracy, which are sort of two strengths of these guys.
Yeah, I think that there's a requisite arm strength, right? You have to be able to make a certain amount of throws down the field, outside the numbers, tight windows, those things. But then the other part of it is the ability to anticipate and to make the decision that puts the ball in the right window. Those things all matter. So again, you don't have to have the strongest arm in the entire draft, but there's a threshold. There's a minimum requisite, I think, is the best way to put it. But the rest of that stuff matters, I think, just as much. Your ability to anticipate, to throw on time, and to throw accurately, and you mix that with the arm strength portion. So there's a lot of different ways it looks. There's a lot of different ways quarterbacks can play. So I hesitate to fit one bucket is more important than the other, but the whole picture has to fit.
Right. How do you evaluate that process, like evaluating the quarterbacks? Like, you look at a rookie, you look at a veteran. Like, how do you weigh out your immediate security versus the long-term security?
I think we're trying to get the best player, period, and whatever that looks like for us doesn't make any difference to me. I want as many good players as we can find, and it's my job to coach them. It's our job as a staff to put them in position to have success, and that part is what matters the most to me. Is that I don't worry about anything other than that. And as many good players as we can get, it's our job to fit them in to our schemes, offense, defense, and special teams. So that's how I look at it. I'll never change how I look at it in that regard, that you have to be able to fit good players into what you do, and you build your systems around that talent at the end of the day. And that's our job.
Brian, what have you learned, I guess, about the top quarterback in this class so far? What can you learn here, especially if some guys are not competing?
Yeah. There's sort of a two-pronged approach, right? There's the evaluation of the tape and what they've shown over their careers. And then there's learning about them as a person. You know, how do they see football? How do they interact with their teammates? How do they interact in your building when you bring them in? So all those touch points now are starting. So we've got the evaluation of the tape, and now you're trying to figure out how that tape matches up with the person and their knowledge of football, their knowledge of schematics, and where those things are good or where they might need to improve. And that's what this next, from now until the draft essentially is about, with the combine being the starting point, and you have your 30 visits in your spot. They have pro days, there's private workouts. All of those things factor into the process as you get closer to the draft. But right now is trying to find out as much as we can about the person, as opposed to just them throwing in a workout.
How do you weigh immediate impact versus upside when you evaluate these younger guys?
I think you're always looking for the player that's going to be better longer. So you always are looking for the long term. I think there's short term components that you're looking for, but you want players that are going to be, playing at their best for their longest, and hopefully for 10, 12, 15 years if you hit it right. And that's all positions. There's you want guys that are going to grow and continue to get better.
Brian, one of the things about the quarterback position being in the first is trying to get a guy, like you said, to be long term. Are you looking for a guy who can compete to be a day one starter if you pick at number one?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Anytime you're picking, especially in the first 2 rounds, 3 rounds, you're looking for guys that can impact and play. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not other paths to that process. There's a lot of different ways it's been done over the years with guys that have spent time sitting. Some guys have played right away. Those are all things that we'll evaluate as we keep going. But certainly picking a guy at the top of the draft that is going to be an impact player.
Is there a way for you to evaluate how a guy takes it from the chalkboard to the field? I mean, who's actually able to pull the trigger when the time comes without actually being on the field?
That part's the hardest part, to be honest. That's a good question, because there's a lot of guys that can talk it in the meeting room. They know what to say, how to say it. They can articulate their schematics. But the hardest part is can they take what's being taught and then execute it? And sometimes it's really more about taking it from the practice, from the meeting room to the game day. That's the part that really matters the most, because guys can sometimes do the meeting room to the practice field, but it's about how do you execute under pressure and under duress when it's all live. And that's the hardest part to find out. Sometimes you don't necessarily know until you know.
Do you have a process for that, though, to try to gauge it?
Oh, yeah. There's ways you can try to simulate it as best you can to try to figure out, where those gaps might be, or where you might be looking for supplementation to get them to that point. But yeah, there's definitely ways that we try to simulate that as best we can. It's not a perfect science, though.
Brian, what's the biggest way that the NIL era and all the accompanying transfers that come with it have changed the way that you evaluate and really try to pull information out of the prospects when you talk to them?
Yeah, I think I would say probably for the area scouts, it's probably the hardest because years past, right, before all these guys transferred, you'd have 2, 3, 4 years of information gathering on a player. If you're an area scout, let's say you're the SEC, you're the Southwest area scout, and you're building 4 years worth of a profile on a player. Well, now these guys might transfer 2 times, usually at least once, sometimes twice. And now there's gaps in the information. The assistant coaches don't know them as well. You don't have the same depth of character evaluation that maybe you had before. So it's a changing landscape, and our guys have, just like everyone across the league, is adapting to. But I think there is an effect on how well you can know a player when they've jumped 2 or 3 times. You got to do your research, and you got to do your due diligence, and you got to make sure you talk to all the people at those places to sort of put the picture together. Whereas, 10 years ago, you could have a pretty good profile built on a player over the course of 3-4 years.
So I know last year you said
collaboration with those area scouts in terms of being collaborating on
Oh yeah,
evaluation.
the area scouts are critical. That their ability to do that and find information. They're in the information gathering business, and their ability to do that now in a changing landscape, I think, is really, really critical. And those guys play a huge role in helping put together the profile of a player when it comes to their makeup. And it's certainly, landscape has changed, and they've done a good job adapting to it.
How realistic is it, do you think, that Travis Hunter could play both ways on the NFL level? Do you think?
One more time.
How realistic is it to think that Travis Hunter might be able to play on both sides of the ball?
Oh, very realistic.
A good deal, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, it's very realistic. I think he's a unique player that there's not a whole lot of other players you could compare what he's done. There's not many guys that have played that many snaps on both sides of the ball. And you watch his tape and you see his ability to play both at a very high level. So, yeah, I think anybody that you talk to about him is going to say the same thing, that he's got the ability to play both. And that I think you're going to find out where he fits if you were to get him. But he's got a really unique ability to do a lot of different things.
Does having him do that, does that become a little bit of a challenge, managing him and making sure that he's?
Well, you got to start somewhere. I mean, you got to put your teeth in a position first, and then you see where you can add them in. So those are all conversations that we have as we work through the process on where, a player like him, what do you do with a player like him, and where do you first start him, and where does he help you on all sides of the ball? So he can return punts. He can, he's got a really unique skill set that I don't think there's many players you can compare him to.
So where did you first start?
I would say you probably start him. He probably starts at corner, and then you find ways to interject him into the offense as he gets more comfortable. He plays more and more offensively, but I think his corner is probably his starting point. In my opinion, you might get varying opinions on that, but then I think he's got a real role as a receiver.
There's an emphasis. I know you said last year there was an emphasis of guys that can put the ball in the end zone, but offensive line is also a really depth-heavy class this year.
Yeah. How
are you guys weighing that as you are evaluating this draft class?
Yeah, we got to get better up front. There's no doubt. We had too many sacks given up, too much pressure. We have to be able to settle that part down. We got to improve the front. I would say you got to improve the fronts on both sides. We're looking to add talent on both sides of the fronts, and I think you can see, the teams that were in it at the end there, that was a major part in their successes, was their ability to play, stout, strong defense and pass rush, and then you got to be able to protect it. So we're always looking for trench players, I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, there's always that outlier. If you could find a great guy, a guy that can score touchdowns at a high rate, that part factors in.
So on that note, when you talk about the difference between fit and then talent level, how do you kind of measure where maybe a guy is a more physically gifted player but hasn't done things in college that fit what you might ask of him versus a player who has done things that you've asked about but may not be the physical talent that maybe another prospect?
Sure. I think the best way to put that is our job as coaches is to put players in the best position to have success. And I would never sacrifice talent for system. It's always going to be player driven and player first. So if you can find a great player, we fit them. And however that looks, there's plenty of plays in football in all 3 phases that you can find ways for guys to have success. So I would always say the player is going to come first, and it's our job as coaches to fit what we do around that player, whether that's an offensive lineman, a receiver, a quarterback, a pass rusher, whatever that looks like. Our job is to fit the system to the talent, and I would never sacrifice scheme over talent at the end of the day as a general philosophy.
April that Cam and Shador were kind of in a leg above the rest of the quarterbacks. Do you kind of still put them in the same bucket, or are you seeing one separate from the other?
Oh, they're both worthy of the conversations that they're in right now. You know, they're both good players. I think they've earned the right to be in the conversations they're in. As far as where I see them and how I stack them, that's for me. But I do think they're worthy of those conversations. There's some other good players in this class too, and I do think that one of the things that's most important is that you never make an assumption when you're in this process, and that you treat every prospect, whether you think they're the first pick or the 200 and something pick, that you go through that evaluation phase with the same intensity and thoroughness that you would regardless of where you think they fall. And so you have an accurate evaluation of all the players, where the class stands and how you'd stack the class. That's also really important because there's evidence over the years that there's a lot of players that in those later rounds that end up being impactful players. And so you just make sure that you do your due diligence on all the positions from the top of the class to the back of it. So you have a great feel for where those guys might fall.
Do you think, given that offensive lineman coming out and the evidence in college that they're not as developed as they used to, is it harder to find offensive linemen, 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, that can come in and be part of your solution?
I think there's a challenge to it because what they do in college is so different than what they're asked to do in the NFL. Usually you find some version of what they do that's good, whether they're a good run blocker or natural pass protector. And then there's going to be some development that has to take place. There's going to be a part of their game that they're going to have to get better at. And they're playing a different caliber of player too, which, some of these tackles, they don't realize how good every week there's a $100 million pass rusher on the other side. So yeah, there's development that goes into it. And you have to be able to do that. And that's the key for the offensive lineman is how quickly they can take to that coaching and perform. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
How's everybody doing?
What's up, Mike? How you doing?
Any questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah.
How much action are you? I know it's early, but is that number one pick a big topic of conversation with your cohorts?
Well, it has been. Yeah. I mean, it has been in the media for sure. Anytime you have number one pick, it's always going to be a topic of conversation. Yeah.
Has it gotten to a point where a lot of other teams are getting very nosy, so to speak?
I would say we've had some phone calls. Yeah. I'll keep those phone calls to the vest, but we've had some phone calls. Yeah.
What found your generational talent as you've gone through the draft picks yet?
Listen, there's a handful of players. Anytime you're at the top of the draft that you would deem generational talents, and we certainly feel that way this year as well.
How would you define that? I guess generational.
Well, it's a real skill set of talent. An impact player that can take the team to another level, whatever position it is. And then you also have to have the character makeup as well to go with it.
Mike, how did your time in Kansas City, how did that shape you in taking this job and how you're evaluating this roster and how you're going to approach the draft?
I was there for 16 years, so, we weren't just going to Super Bowls every year when I first got there. So, in 2012, we had a 2-14 season where we had to, rebuild it. So, yeah, there's some things throughout that process that I'll take, just in terms of building the core positions that you need on the roster, offensive line, defensive line, and then also just getting, trying to build the culture right, too, to try to get the right type of people in there as well. People who are smart, tough, dependable, selfless players, team players. So that's what we're looking for right now.
Do you feel that Abdul Carter fits into that?
I'm sorry?
You mentioned generational talents. Do you feel Abdul Carter is one of those players? And what have your takeaways been?
Yeah, I mean, Abdul's a very good player. I don't want to go into many evaluations of the players, but like I said, there's certainly some players at the top there that fit that description of generational talent.
You saw firsthand what the Buccaneers did to the Chiefs and Mahomes, and then you see what the Eagles have done. Does that kind of skew the level of importance you weigh on the trenches and being able to impact the quarterback?
Well, I think it's always important. I mean, you can have Superman back there, and if you don't have the protection up front to protect, to be able to run the football, to be able to create balance in the game, that's the most important part, is building through the trenches. So offensive line, defensive line is going to be a big priority for us.
when you are fielding those offers for that number 1 pick, what are some of the things you are looking for in return? I don't know how broadly or specifically you can get, but like,
Yeah, we really haven't really gone into too much of that. You know, I've fielded some calls at this point, but we really haven't gone too much into it right at this point.
What have the last couple of weeks been like leading up to this week, and what would you consider the top positions in this year's NFL draft?
So to answer your first question, the last few weeks we've been in meetings whole time, draft meetings, free agency meetings, going over our roster as well, meeting with the coaches. So it's been a busy time. In terms of the strengths, I'd say obviously defensive line, specifically edge players. It's a really deep draft. I would say running backs, it's a good draft. There's some good tight ends in that position group. So I think it's a good draft overall, but there's certainly some positions that more strength and a little bit more depth in the middle to later rounds as well.
This team spent a lot of capital on offensive line. Does that factor in at all to what you do going forward because it hasn't spent a lot of capital at other positions?
No, not necessarily. I think we're starting this off on a clean slate right now. And offensive line, like I said, is going to be a top priority, whether that's through free agency, the draft, or anything, waiver claims, trades. We're going to look onto every avenue really to add to that group. And I think the most important part too is adding the right type of players to that group too. So that's a tight knit group, that offensive line. So getting tough guys in there, smart, dependable, good teammates. The characteristics for that group are very important.
You talked about wanting to add draft capital over the next 2 to 3 years to build this team. But in the interim, there may be a veteran quarterback or two who could become available, but the team might want draft capital for them. Does that make you more reluctant to pursue a veteran quarterback if the team wants draft capital to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal we stated to like I said, draft picks are our biggest form of currency. So, we're always going to try to gather as many picks in the top 100 as we can. But we have to be disciplined through the process here, as we're going through and looking at free agents and, possible trades. We certainly want to hold on to our draft picks as much as we can.
You said you looked at edge rushers the past couple of weeks. What are those traits that you're looking for? You said you looked at edge rushers the past couple of weeks. What are some of those traits that you look for in a pass rusher?
Yeah, obviously get off, the ability to dip around the edge, and just having a relentless passion to get to the quarterback is a big part of it. So those qualities are, things that we're really looking for.
Like, any concerns that if you don't take a quarterback when you have the number 1 pick, you never know when you might have that selection again to have that opportunity?
Sure. I mean, you can think that way. But, at the end of the day, we have to make the best decision at this point for the Titans. And if we deem like taking a quarterback is the most important thing right now, then we'll do that. But we have to go through this process here. So this is like one touch point in the process. We've gone through the whole evaluation part. Now we're finally getting to sit down and meet with these guys and talk with them. We'll have pro days. We'll have 30-day visits. So we have to go through the whole process really to make that decision.
Do you abide by kind of a height, weight, speed characteristic by position? And when do you stray from that?
We do. We always have. You don't want to make exceptions at certain positions. So we'll have a profile for each position. Now, you never want to just throw away a good football player if he doesn't fit those measurables. But we certainly have profiles for every position in terms of, when we're making acquisition periods, whether it's free agency or the draft.
Mike, you talked about a couple of guys who are generational prospects. In a trade down scenario, is it important for you to stay within range to get a generational prospect, or trading down further get you more shots at the apple cart? Is that something that would interest you?
Well, that's part of the strategy that you have to put together. Just like we're going to have a free agent strategy, there's going to be a draft strategy too. So we'll get together as a group and think through all that. But you certainly don't want to pass up on one of those players if you think they're there. And an opportunity to trade back. Depends how far you can go back to get that player. So to your point, there's a strategy to it.
How would you define, because one of the things that came up was being selective in free agency. How would you define it? You look at this organization last year, they spent a lot of money, didn't necessarily work out. What's your approach to being selective?
Well, I think in the press conference, our philosophy is more when draft and developed. That's going to be our number one thing, number one priority. But to be selective is just to have discipline in the process. We're going to have targeted players that we want, And if sometimes, that player doesn't come to us, we're not just going to jump to the next player. We're going to have players that we're going to target, and you have to have discipline throughout that process as well.
In targeting those players, though, there could be some big ticket guys. I mean, you obviously have more holes than you can fill, no matter what you might end up with draft pick wise, right?
Sure, Paul. I think that's part of the strategy too. We're trying to fill, probably as many holes as we can before the draft, and you're trying to see. At this point, you have a free agency board, you have a draft board. You're trying to see the depth in free agency, the depth in the draft, and where you might be able to acquire those players. But you certainly want to try to fill as many holes as you can in free agency. And, we have some work to do on the roster.
What you do at quarterback in free agency, might that tip what you're doing with the first pick?
I don't think that will depend. I don't think those will go hand in hand. We could sign a quarterback in free agency and also draft a quarterback as well.
Would you prefer that? Do you want to pair a veteran with a young player, or if you lean quarterback?
Depends on the situation. The places I've been, we've always had, older quarterbacks kind of mentor the younger quarterback. It's almost like another coach in the room for them, just to kind of show them how to be a pro, teach them all the little things about protection and just how to study opponents. That would probably be a priority for us if we did end up drafting a quarterback.
When you're evaluating him listed at 185, we'll know what he weighs this week.
Yeah.
There's never been a player drafted first or second under 200 pounds. Is he that extraordinary to break that trend?
He's a special player. Yeah, for sure. We were watching him, and I don't know if there's anybody that's actually done what he's done in the modern day football, playing both offense and defense during the course of a season. He's a special player.
When you look at this roster,
that he would make significant.
This roster, you see and talk about all the holes. Where do you see strengths on this roster right now?
I think we have some good interior guys right now with Sweat and Simmons. There's some pieces on the roster. Calvin's still a good receiver. But we have to get better throughout the offensive line. And that's going to be a priority for us. And that's part of the process here too, is we're evaluating this roster, is trying to figure out, where are the weak points right now? Where do we really have to improve? But there are some pieces on the roster that we can build on, and certainly that interior defensive line is one of them.
How long before you can compete for a division?
Our hope is to compete every year for a division, Paul. But it's a process. So hopefully we're in contention this year. You always want to manage expectations, though. So as we go through this process, we acquire players. I think we'll have a better idea as we head into the season.
Mike, Hunter, is it realistic to think he could make significant contribution on both sides on the NFL level?
I think he could. Yeah, I think he could. You've seen it. You've seen tape of it, and playing corner and receiver. So I think he can do both at a high level.
Mike, when you evaluate the field drills this week, how is that going to help with the evaluation overall? Like, does that change? Will that change how you maybe view some of the players that are later on in this draft, or maybe to some of those generational guys, can they move the needle and kind of hop another guy for you?
Yeah, you take every drill into account. It's really just a validation of what you see on tape. Does the guy run as fast as you think he ran during when he was playing during the fall? And then it's almost like a red flag system too. So if there's some certain drills that they don't do well, that causes you to kind of go back and do a little more work in the tape to make sure you've seen it right as well.
As you're evaluating, I guess your own free agents, what's the balance like, and you having an opinion of these guys coming in, and also trying to get opinions of people who have been with them in the past, whether it's Brian or other guys on the staff?
Yeah, so that was part of the process over the last few weeks, is really because we're trying to get everything done at once here, free agency draft, and we met with the coaches during lunch during these times, just to get a feel of the players on the roster, specifically how they are in meeting rooms and everything else. So that's a big part of it. We met with Brian and his staff over the past month here.
Do you envision needing a lot more cap room? Are you satisfied where you are, or
I think we're in good shape right now. Yeah.
Like you're trying to build.
Yeah, I've been there before. It's arguably the most important position in sports, quarterback position. So you have to get that right. We have to solidify that position. And we have Will on the roster right now, and he's going to compete with whoever we bring in. We have one quarterback on the roster, so we're bringing people in, and Will compete with them as well.
When you're trying to fill multiple positions at once, how could an edge rusher who could potentially spy and maybe even drop back into coverage. What could that do for your defense?
I mean, if he's a generational pass rusher, I just like him to rush the passer. At that point, just play to his strengths. But now, if there's a guy that can drop in coverage, that's great. But if their strength is rushing the passer, that's what we want to see him do.
Hey, Mike, February, no daylight February for the scouting process. I just wanted to get your take on what those past few weeks have been like during the no daylight time and how you feel about how far you've gotten as a group together during that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important time for us. You get in, early in the morning before the sun's up, and you're out of the building when the sun's down. So that's what he's referring to, and it's going into darkness, as we call it. But it's an important time just to build camaraderie with the staff, creating bonds with the staff as well. And so we did that for the past months, which I think was great.
What's the status of your draft board at this point in the process? Have you started putting something together? Is it?
Yeah, so we set the board the first time, and we call it phase 1. And I try to tell the scouts, listen, this isn't the final process. We have a lot of information to gather, medical information, character information, measurables, testing. But we do have an initial board set right now.
How much does that board change between now and?
We try not to make drastic changes, Paul, on it. But some of the medical information obviously will affect that. Some of the testing does move guys up and down the board a little bit. But we try not to make drastic measures. We want to be a tape-driven team and really not just depend on these other variables that come in.
So what kind of drop or rise would you see a guy make off of something, barring a huge injury?
Small moves. Yeah.
Hey, if you're with the national media, we're going to do it.
The crew.
Hey guys, how you doing?